Dialing in the new year, part 4, putting it all together, getting started with training. So, in part 1, we talked about muscle growth. In part 2, we talked about fat loss. In part 3, we did a nutrition overview. And now in part 4, what we're going to do is kind of throw together your first week of training so that you have a baseline with which to plan subsequent weeks in order to make your 2025 both successful and sustainable. Let's get started. Okay, since we all live on the same planet, we know that we have 7 days in a week, 4 weeks in a month. Using the week to break down our training schedule, what we're going to start off with, and this is assuming that most of you watching this particular series are beginner to early intermediates when it comes to training. So you may need some guidance in regards to putting your program together, an initial program at any rate. We're going to start with 4 days a week, leaving 3 days off or optional. The reason why I'm starting with 4 is because that'll give us 2 days for resistance training for our lifting, and then 2 days for our cardio, our conditioning. How you break up this 4-day split is totally up to you, and this is where it becomes more of a personal, individual choice to nuance things so that it's amenable to your lifestyle. All right, so for ease of interpretation, I'm going to go off the assumption that most of you listening to this operate with a 40-hour work week consisting of either 4 10s, so like a Monday through Thursday, for example, or 5 8s, Monday through Friday, for example. That'll give us a general framework with which to plan our on and off days of training. And then for those of you that have a different schedule, obviously, take the general principles outlined in this video and then modify them to suit your daily schedule. Okay, so now which of these days do we put our training on? Some people like to incorporate their training days into their work schedule, and that kind of helps them stay more regular because they just group it in with their daily responsibilities, for lack of a better term. Other people find that it's more useful to them to put their training on days where they aren't working, on quote-unquote off days in terms of responsibility, so that number one, they're more fatiguing, harder, heavier training happens on days where they can bank more sleep. And then also, just contextually, it pairs their training with more enjoyable recreational type activities. In either case, the beginner program is going to look like the following. Like I said, we're going to lift twice a week. We're going to do cardio twice a week. The cardio days are going to be the simplest, so I'll start off with those. We're not going to count walking as cardio because our step count is going to be an independent metric that we're going to talk about later. So walking is not going to be what we're doing for cardio. We got to work a little bit harder than that, okay? So it can be a bike, elliptical, stair stepper, Jacob's ladder. We can go for a swim. We can do a ruck march, rowing machine. You got a ton of different options here, okay? But what I want you to do is I want you to push the intensity. I want you to push the wattage to a zone 2, which you can determine not by heart rate, but by the talk test. Now the talk test is quite simple, okay? When you're doing cardio and your heart rate is just high enough where you can still hold a conversation, but it's kind of clear to the person on the other side, to the listener, that you're actually exercising, that's where you want to be for the majority of this session, okay? So increase the intensity to the point where you're breathing a little bit labored, and then sing a song, have a conversation with yourself if you're working out with a buddy, or making a phone call or something like that. Talk a little bit to make sure that you're right at that inflection point, and then maintain that for the duration of the cardio session. Again, our minimum value for this to be considered as our cardio workout is going to be 20 minutes, and our maximum value is going to be an hour. You really don't need to be doing this kind of training for longer than an hour unless your intent is to become an endurance athlete. One easy way to add wattage, to add intensity to these zone 2 sessions so that you don't have to move faster to get in that higher talk test area is add load or resistance. Easy ways to add resistance, for instance, are to just throw a couple plates or a kettlebell in a pack, and now a nice easy stroll turned into a moderate intensity zone 2 ruck march. Instead of getting on the exercise bike at the gym with 0 intensity, put it on level 5, level 8, level 10. Same thing with the step mill. Don't just walk at a level 1 or a level 2. Go up those steps at 7, 8, 10. Challenge yourself. But remember, we want to make sure that it's number 1, sustainable from session to session, and number 2, sustainable for at the very minimum 20 minutes unbroken. And that's key, folks, unbroken, because we're looking for a very specific adaptation here, and that's not going to happen if you're starting and stopping and starting and stopping. We're not trying to burn calories. We're looking for a very specific training adaptation, and that's building your aerobic capacity. Okay, moving on from the cardio, with our lifting, since we're lifting 2 days a week, there's a couple of ways you can go about doing this. I recommend either doing an upper-lower split, so all your upper body movements on one day, all your lower body movements on another day, or depending on how far apart you space your lifting sessions, you could do a full body session twice a week. If you're going to do a full body session twice a week, I recommend that you space them roughly 72 hours apart. So you could do a full body session on Monday and then another one on Thursday. If you are, however, doing an upper-lower split, you could do upper-lower back-to-back days or with a day break in between. As far as sets, reps, and exercises for your lifting days, a good place to start would be 3 to 5 sets of 3 to 5 exercises. You're going to want to start with the larger, heavier, more fatiguing compound movements first. So things like presses, rows, squats, hip hinges. These sort of compound movements hit the largest amount of muscles simultaneously. They're the most fatiguing, but they also have the most robust training stimulus in terms of growth, strength development, bone and connective tissue density, the whole shebang. They check a lot of boxes at once. I recommend you basing your workouts off of a primary and secondary one of those, followed by a primary, secondary, tertiary, accessory movement that hits some of the little areas that you want to work on more. Things like shoulders, biceps, triceps, calves, hamstrings, etc. In terms of total training volume, I think something around 30 to 40 total sets per week is a good place to start, making that 15 to 20 sets per each of the 2 lifting sessions. Now, this might seem like the bare minimum drop in the bucket amount of volume for some of you younger and or more advanced folks. However, you got to remember that this video series is directed mostly towards the beginner or the early intermediate that also has a career, family, school, a lot of other external stress inputs besides their training that's trying to make a change for the better moving on into the new year. And with that said, the last thing I want to address in this particular video is step count or daily background activity, okay? Depending on your level of health and fitness or lack thereof, when starting a program like this, despite what you might think, 4 times a week of structured training in the gym or however you do it might not be sufficient to push the needle. That's where the background activity that you do in addition to your structured training sessions comes into play. And that's why, in addition to the 4X training, I recommend at a minimum, so no less than, 9,000 steps per day to include off days. This doesn't have to be done at all times. It just has to be completed before you lay down at the end of the day to go to sleep. And that's it, folks. Part 4 of my Dialing in the New Year series, getting ready for 2025. Remember, folks, these are just general overviews to get you started with more specific content coming in subsequent videos. Like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, Discord link in the description. Consistency is a superpower. Stay in the fight. Thanks for watching.